Spinning wheel, and we are live. Todd Snap, welcome to the show. Fantastic.
Hey, thanks, Eddie. Appreciate it.
All right, good man. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are streaming. We will be archiving this so that you can listen to it at any time on various different platforms. You'll see it on the socials soon enough. I'm Eddie Doyle, Global Security Strategist with Checkpoint Software Technologies, based out of Tel Aviv. And with us today, I have the president of Todd Snap, president of SCYTHE. And Todd, I'd love to get a bit of an intro on, who you are, and let's take us back to when you started the company and what it was for, the genesis that brought that magical moment together for you that you now find yourself sitting in a chair saying, yeah, I'm the president of this thing for the past however many years. Give us your story.
Oh, so the magic, huh? Yeah. Well, it was interesting. When we first started the company, it was 2004. And when we started it, it was all about providing web-based training. You remember back in 2004, everybody was having to do compliance training and they were trying to do web-based training and tracking. And so we had some experience in software. And so that's what we did. We built a platform for that. Well, right off the bat, we kind of had some people reach out to us and it was because, you remember Paris Hilton in 2004 had her phone hacked. Remember, you're going to wonder why
this
Paris
Hilton
go
well.
No,
but you remember we're taking this conversation, but I love it.
You remember Paris Hilton got her phone hacked back in 2004.
Yeah.
T-Mobile. And the other telecommunications companies realized we had content, we had a lot of information related to social engineering. And so they came to us and they said, hey, could you help us protect ourselves against that same type of thing? It's like we've got people out there who are having their phones hacked and we're having our networks hacked, but it's happening through social engineering methods, not necessarily through the network. And so they got spooked. And so that's how Paris Hilton came into this, that she got hacked and it spooked all of the telecommunications companies. And so they came to us and said, could you help us protect ourselves? And of course, we were a small fledgling business at the time, and our answer was yes, whatever.
Yes, I'll do anything.
Yeah, and so we said yes. And so what we did is started testing. We started testing these companies to see how vulnerable they were to social engineering attacks, phone calls, pretext phone calls, email phishing, even their facilities or things like that. And so we said, what are all the ways that a company could get hacked that aren't through the computers and the network, it's through the people. And that was, like you said, the genesis of where we really started to make a name for ourselves. And we started to get a lot of attention.
So let me ask you a question there, Todd. So Paris Hilton's phone, I'm assuming then, I can't quite remember how it was hacked. That was through social engineering. So she was engineered.
It was the website. It was on a website and they called in and pretended to be her and reset passwords. And so basically people called in and misrepresented themselves to get access to her web account. The phone didn't matter. It was the web account where all that data was.
So the people who were socially compromised was the telco.
Yes.
That's interesting, right? Because you have a celebrity figure that has influence over something, and you mentioned T-Mobile, right? Yeah. And that's a company that is fighting for dominance, right? Yeah. Because certainly they're not a Verizon, they're not an AT&T, right? And that could have really hurt them. And so they got socially engineered on a high-profile account, spooked them. I think you're perfectly right. And then you were invited in as a fledgling company. And so you were the fledgling company as T-Mobile was to AT&T, right?
True,
so good for you guys, right? Grabbing that contract.
We worked with them too at one point, so yeah.
So give me some examples. What were some of the things you did then to test T-Mobile? Yeah. I mean, don't be specific because obviously there's confidentiality, but give me some examples. What are typical things you do to test?
Well, and I should say T-Mobile wasn't our customer. They were just the one that got hacked. The other companies, the other telecommunications are the ones that said we need to protect. And that was during a time where certainly, firewall software and all of the appliances and even email filtering, it all existed. But all of a sudden people realized we have vulnerability in an area that is outside of software and is outside of hardware. Now, listen, the Twitter attack just a couple of weeks ago on celebrity accounts, very similar. It was social engineering, and it wasn't them hacking. That wasn't him hacking a network. It was them hacking people. And so what we did was they came to us and they said, tell us where we're vulnerable and we don't know it. And so that's what we had to figure out. So we started creating fake websites. We made websites that looked like the telecommunications companies, but weren't really. We sent email phishing that were targeted. We made phone calls to their call center. We called their IT help desk to try to get passwords reset. And we were wildly successful. That was really where it started. We were scared to death because we didn't know what we were doing, but we just did our best. And this was, of course, 16 years ago. But we just gave it a shot. And it was like at the end of it, it was 2 weeks in, we had access to every major system, people's emails. We had stolen passwords. We had people who had clicked on email phishing, and it hit us. This is a gap. And that's really where we came in, is there are gaps in the security space that people aren't addressing. And that's where we came in. And that really is what we're talking about today, is how to change the way you do your security strategy based on culture, because that's where the gap is. That's where,
And this is my interest, ladies and gentlemen, in having Todd on this call, because it's like, so I represent a company who's the 900-pound gorilla in the manufacturer's space of making cybersecurity tools, products, software, hardware, whatever it might be. No threat actor in their right mind is going to say, hey, I think I'll just go brute force a checkpoint security web gateway. No, it'll take you 10,000 years of man hours, and so far no one's been successful. It'll take you a trillion. You're much better off going after what you just addressed in the marketplace there, Todd. But what's fascinating to me is it's like, okay, the genesis for this with the Paris Hilton phone hack way back when, 16 years ago. Today, with the Twitter attack that you just mentioned, which included some insider threats, I believe, so the rumorville says, there was an insider, a guy that knew what he was doing there, was probably like getting paid off, so that fellow get to jail, I'm sure. But we're still facing the same challenges. How can vendors like us that make these incredibly robust tools, think of a tank, right, work with companies like yours to bring awareness to our collective customer base so that, well, we've solved the problem of people not getting hacked when we put up a big tank around them. But if somebody has a carrot dangled and they open up the top of the tank and climb out and say, give me that carrot, right? And so, how can we work together on these kinds of things for awareness to make, to use an overcoined phrase, a human firewall? Right?
Yeah, and then we've been using that for a long time, and we trademarked the human side of security because there's a component to this that, and I call it a gap, and it's not because Checkpoint is not doing a good job of what they do. It is because they are. It is because they are locking down places and they are creating strong software. And that's not just to compliment you. It is because the nature of that is why the bad guys find these other gaps. And they say, you know what? I'm not going to be able to do a DDoS. I'm not going to be able to hack a network. I'm not going to be able to. I can't hit the endpoints. Here's what I can do: is I can make phone calls and I can send emails and I can get a human being to make a mistake that gives me an opportunity. And so, to me, that's the way. When you take a Checkpoint and a Stride Point and you put them together, the whole goal there is to say we're handling all of the different entry points. The entry points are in the network, they're in the endpoints, they're at the actual system level, but they're also at the human level, and they're at their email level, they're at the the Slack level, they're all SMS. It's interesting that it didn't just stop with phone calls and emails. It went to SMS, and and it's now going to these workspace type chat tools, and it's wherever people can be deceived. That's where the bad guys go. And so that, I think the answer to your question is, there has to be a recognition. Obviously we know we have a lot of gaps. We deal with the humans, but we don't deal as much with the technology platform. Both of them have to be addressed.
I want to get back to some of the things that you do. So your company does pen testing for social engineering, let's call it that. And so you mentioned, phone calls, texts. Now, of course, there's additional tools like Zoom that people can get involved in. You mentioned your chat type tools. So give us a more modern day story of one. Obviously, anonymize it, scrub it for anonymization. Right, that's right. To anonymize it. Give us some examples of some of the things you're doing that people are falling for. Maybe start with the most common and then give us a unique one.
Well, the reality is that it hasn't changed a lot. All that's happened is the medium. The methods are very similar. So, for example, back in early 2000s, we found that the most powerful way to get information back then was to create a fake website that looked really legit. Copying HTML is nothing. Get a fake website up, put it on a domain that looks fairly legitimate, and then send an email to people. This was this was email phishing at the time. Send an email to people saying, click on this link. When they get to the website, it looks legit. They enter their password, and we got it.
Right.
Now people are just doing that same thing, but with different mediums. They're just finding the different ways that they can do that. Twitter, for example, that really, wouldn't have been hacked at that time. Now people say, well, there's a lot of really private information, a lot of things that can be done, a lot of damage that can be done on a social media account. So us getting access, perhaps getting a password changed or getting access to a social media account or to a Slack account or a Zoom account, there's a lot that can be gained there from doing that.
And in actual fact, so for those who are unfamiliar, who might be watching this show as a sort of a curiosity factor for cybersecurity and might not have paid attention, because everybody in our industry knows what happened to Twitter last week. But for those that are unfamiliar, what happened is some high-profile accounts, presidential accounts, vice presidential accounts, influencers, the Jeff Bezos type characters of this world, they got their Twitter account hacked. And it was for monetary gain. So the threat actors that did this, were basically saying, hey, look, I'm the richest guy in the world. If you donate $1,000 worth of Bitcoin to this charity, I'll double it or triple it or quadruple it. So just send it here and I'll send back a whole bunch more money. And I think a few $100,000 worth, was compromised from various people around the world. It was shut down within a few hours after the compromise had been realized. Now, there's the background. Those threat actors missed the biggest opportunity. And so you think about the opportunity. So don't be fooled by my cowboy accent. While I'm a Brit, I do live in the United States. And, our democracy coming up in an election year, the interference from foreign governments, they could have done so much more damage by basically grabbing these presidential accounts and saying something that would incite more violence than there already is in some of the small pockets.
The amount of social engineering that takes place during an election is crazy. And so, of course, you and I aren't going to take a political stand on this, but I think on both sides during the last election, there was so much deception going on, related to social media, related to news, and it was across the board. And that is very valuable outcome, and it is done with a lot of the same methods. And so our job has to be to take an organization and say, where are you vulnerable? So, for example, the first question we ask is, what are you protecting? And that's something you've probably found a lot of people don't think about. What are we protecting? They just think we need to be secure in general. But we say, what are you protecting, first of all? And then, how are you protecting it? And so, for example, we've dealt with a lot of financial institutions and a lot of insurance type agencies. And we find that some of their most valuable information is not just able to be accessed on a server. It's able to be accessed directly through a frontline call center person. And for example, just getting to one person's account and getting information, either being able to access the account or get money from it or change information on it, that just one account represents a pretty scary breach. And it all can be done over the phone at a call center with a person who has probably not had their job very long.
Yeah.
And so what we discovered is by sending emails, by making these phone calls, by deceptive websites, we're basically bypassing the whole infrastructure of security and stealing some of the scariest stuff. And so, like I said, with the financial institutions and insurance companies, their process is they have to support people on the phone. They have to support people on chat. They have to support people. And as a result, it changes the whole method of security, that you have to be just as vigilant there as you are on the software side, on the platform side.
Yeah, so for those who are listening, that there are not small, but there are relevant technological tools to help with this, but not foolproof by any means, which is why I'm so interested in our relationship, between StrikePoint and Checkpoint. Because one tool, for example, will be what we nickname the Superman effect. So, threat actor calls into a front desk and says, blah, blah, gets the details, gets the credentials, right? Now, what we can do is we can institute a tool that basically says, hey, look, if you see a login from any credential, so let's say front desk receptionist, it's John Smith. He's unfortunately been socially engineered, doesn't know it still, right? He's logged into his system. If we then see somebody else logging into his system from Nigeria, from a former USSR type country, we call this the Superman effect. There's no way John Smith could be logging in on one machine and then another part of the world within a few hours. So we know that's a threat, and we can shut down the whole login, lock this guy out.
It's required. Yeah, you have to have that. Yeah.
Right, so we can do that, but the threat actors are smart. I mean, there are some dummies out there, but the threat actors are smart, so they know full well that we've got this kind of tool. So the next thing they're going to do during their social engineering of John, the front desk receptionist guy, is find out his work hours so that they can then log in at appropriate times, etc. Or, of course, spoof their IP address so that the system doesn't quite see that. We have
an explanation, right? I mean, and it's amazing how powerful an explanation is in that, and what you said, there's a lot of technology we went through. We've gone through so long. We've worked with financial institutions for so long that we've seen them go through all the different types of authentication technology and all of the different. And so what we do is we get brought in frequently. They say, hey, we got a new foolproof thing. It's a voice recognition. Or they did things where it was, we have background information we're going to test. So anytime a person calls in to get authenticated, we're going to ask them questions about their public records. And so we've been through all of them. And it's not that they're easy to beat. We don't go in and beat a voice recognition system. We have used voice changers before, and we do things where we do caller ID spoofing. That's not hard to do. But we don't go in and beat the technology of a voice changers or a voice recognition system, or beat the technology. We bypass it. And that's the whole point. And so, for example, here's an example of some that have happened. We call in and we say we're somebody we're not. They then will say, well, I need to ask you some questions to validate your identity. No problem. Well, we take it. We're never going to get it right. If we don't know the actual information, we get it wrong. We just have to get it wrong in such a way where they still believe us. And so then they say, we need to get you to second level. So maybe they ask us our social security number, or they ask us our birth date or whatever, and we get those wrong. Maybe we don't know them. Maybe bad people don't know those. Well, then they say, well, let me take you through a few other things. What was the make and model of your first car? And what is your mother's maiden? And then if we guess well enough and we get enough, they ask enough questions, we might get authenticated.
Right.
Well, then the game's over. Then we're authenticated. We've had them before where they have asked us those questions. We missed everything, but we got just enough questions right, where afterwards they came back and said, listen, we got to get the system fixed. It looks like your social security number's wrong, and it looks like your birth date is wrong. Let's get those updated. And we actually get to change a person's. And so all of those things, that whole process, it demonstrates a lack of a culture, that people are understanding how people go about this.
And it has to be created, like there has to be a process that can be followed that's foolproof, because the reality is, like, these call centers, oftentimes they're overseas with somebody whose English is a second language. That's the first thing. So what happens to you mentally when you're an English as a second language person? The person on the other end of the phone, who you've been told to be super polite to, you've been told this is a customer who's important, don't annoy them, right? Are saying certain things, and you feel like you're in a position of inferiority. Now, what happens there is you give up the strength, right? You give up control of the process you just said. I agree with you. I don't know how many calls I've been on to, let's say some utility to authenticate myself because I want to talk about my bill. They asked me my social insurance number. I forgot. Give me something else. Well, what was your favorite dog? And I'm like, okay, I forgot that one too, because that was 10 years ago. So I'm failing all the security. I get one right, and they go, okay, you're ready.
Yeah, that's really. I've done it where they ask me. I have trouble getting into my own accounts the same way, where they're like, what was the amount of your last deposit? I have no idea. But then I find I can't get into my own account, but they then will say, oh, well, what is the address on file? And I'll tell them my address, and I think that's not authentication. And it's because what they're doing is they're just dropping down. And what we found is that when we're doing phone calls or emails or chat or whatever we're doing, the people, like you said, they want to provide great customer service, and rightfully so. But often what happens is they just don't want to upset a person. Or they don't want to have an awkward moment. And they certainly don't want to call a person a liar. That is so hard to do in any phase of life. And so what they would rather do is get through this call. Just get this done. And so we had them before where they'll be saying to us, I just need to find some questions that you can get right. And they're really trying to work through questions, and they want to give you softballs because they don't want that awkwardness. That, to me, once again, demonstrates a lack of understanding of a culture of security. It's not just It's not just policies. It's not just I need to do these things or I get fired. It is I'm protecting something here, and I need to understand how people go about obtaining it. That's the goal.
it's all too easy to yell at that call center rep, and to be sure that they own some of the responsibility. But I think we in the technology field have failed them. A perfect example is alphanumeric passwords, right? With upper caps, lower caps, symbols, minimum of 8, etc. Now, NIST's latest guidelines actually do not recommend that we change passwords every 3 months. And it's simply because people run out of complex things to remember. So they can't do it. They just can't.
I can tell you a story about that here in a minute.
Yeah, well, and so, this is what I call the lab coat. So let's go to the smartest people in the world, PhDs in mathematics and linguistics, give them a Western QWERTY keyboard and say, create the most secure thing you can possibly create. It's like, okay, they will, because guess what? They're nerds. They're really smart people. But you can't. The rest of the world is left to sanction the programmization of themselves. I'll give you a perfect example. And so many people listening to this will be like, oh, that's exactly what I do, Eddie. That's exactly what I do.
Yeah.
I know. I would say don't worry, but worry and change your passwords after this. This is what people do. They say, okay, well, I need some kind of generic form of password for all my sites, but I can't have the same password. So I'll change one digit. So let's say it's a password for their Gmail. So what they'll do is they'll type out Gmail and maybe change the A to an @ symbol and the I to a 1. And then they'll put, Gmail for dad, Gmail, the number 4, mum, Gmail for, and their kids' names. Yeah. It's just like,
they can remember them all.
This is what happens when normal people are told by the lab coats to get on with security.
We came to a realization about that a few years ago where we were doing a project and we were trying to see if we could obtain passwords from people by sending them an email and having a fake website with a login on it and saying, and we want you to put in your username and password. And of course, if we ever capture those, we immediately deliver them to the company and delete them. So we never hold those things. But we thought our system was broken because we did one time an email that worked way better than we expected. And we started just having passwords show up. And people, of course, because whenever we do that, we tell them that it failed so that they'll try another one. And so people are putting in every password they've ever had.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah. And so we kept getting the same password. And so we thought our system's messed up or the database, something's wrong. Because it kept coming up, season and the year. It kept coming up summer 2018 or some version of summer 2018, spring 20. And we were like, well, something's broken. And finally it hit us. No, it wasn't broken. Tons of people
change their passwords. So they do with the season.
One of our specialists here calls that undermining policy. And that's what happened is they were undermining the policy of changing the password every 90 days, which is a really antiquated policy. But they had to change them every 90 days, but they didn't want to forget it. So they said, well, season and the year. And what it did was it took something that should be secure and made it extremely unsecure.
That's right. That's right.
And now I know your password forever.
Yeah. Right. We've made the most secure system possible with one of these.
Yeah.
And we've made it completely insecure. I was talking to a CISO yesterday who is working with a company developing the following technology. And this is pretty cool. So hear this out. It's a complete startup. We'll see if it goes. So facial recognition obviously is a thing, right? Yeah. Computers have it. Mobile devices have it. So how many times, so I travel a lot for a living when it's not COVID-19, and I'll be standing at an airport lineup and somebody's on their phone like this, right? So if I'm on the screen, and I could be standing right there, right behind them.
Yeah.
And I could see everything if I were to so choose now.
Shoulder surfing, yeah.
So that's right. So here's what's interesting about that. So what this firm is attempting to do is use the camera on all the time. Same with the laptop, okay? And it's constantly authenticating you so that when you're working on your systems, as long as your face is the only face working on the system, system's up and running. The second I do this, it shuts the system down. And the second the system sees another face here, it shuts the screen down. Pretty cool, right? That's a good answer. I think the answer does lie in biometrics. I think we'll have to just muscle through this whole alphanumeric password nightmare that we were given. There was an apology letter. I don't know if you read it by the guy that really came up with this. He wrote an apology saying, yeah, I'm sorry I did that to you, like humanity. So I think we'll have to muscle through this moment in time, and then biometrics will have to be built into our systems. Soon enough, with what's happening with nano technology, a lot of this stuff is going to be implanted. I know I'm getting a little bit kind of out there, but
you're right. Biometrics are going to help a lot, and they're going to help with authentication a lot. The question is going to become, What happens when the biometrics don't work? Is it, for example, I don't have very good fingerprints, and so my fingerprints don't work on me very often. There are people who, I saw one time where they had a special kind of pen that you signed with, and they knew how you used a pen. I saw one where it's iris, and the problem comes down to, if that doesn't work, what's the backup plan, and how secure is the backup plan? Well, that's where we come in. Yeah.
Yeah. This is where the passwords will have to come back as a backup plan. Yeah. I think that it'll be facial recognition. I'm putting my money on facial recognition being
interesting. How I have facial recognition on my phone, and I get frustrated with it because I'm wearing a mask. So now when I wear my mask, my facial recognition doesn't work, and I want to turn it off. And so it's one of those things where who knew that a disease would cause a problem with facial recognition?
Well, this is a great pivot point, actually, Todd. I wanted to ask you about that. So, what we've seen at Checkpoint since COVID-19, I've lost count now, or rather I've just stopped counting how many malicious fake COVID-19 related websites, where's my stimulus check, COVID-19 related websites, these kinds of things. It was in the way into the tens of thousands, and we had found, it's a huge endeavor, obviously. I think it's over 70,000 websites we found. The last count, and this is probably 6 weeks ago, was a full 3% are completely malicious, and we suspect another 20% of 67,000. So it's a lot. So that's been a big change in our world. The other change in our world is the fact that corporations have just sent millions of people home, and so we've had to secure. You've become the CISO of your own home. So that's been very interesting for us. What about in your world? I want to know, how have the social engineering attacks perhaps changed? How have companies reacted in the COVID-19 times, specific to the things that you're teaching them? Talk to us a little bit about that, Todd.
Well, you've mentioned a couple different sides to it. I'll briefly mention the one side, which is the opportunity for bad guys to use the COVID world as an opportunity to deceive people. So that you've mentioned that, where emails and PPP and all the stimulus checks, it creates an opportunity, a very emotionally charged opportunity for bad guys to deceive people. So that's the first thing, which is there's always something, but this is a big one, and it's one that motivates people. But the other side of it, which we've seen probably is more impactful, is that everyone not just working from home, but having a huge change in their work environment. So it is the work from home thing, but it's also the fact that there's a huge turnover in how people work, and where they, what device they use, and where they, and how much they need centralized IT. All those things play into a lowering of security posture and a lowering of the mindset of security. What we found was, over years and years of testing call centers, what we do is, every time we test a call center with do an audit, and we're making phone calls, we're sending emails, we note the people we talk to, and we find out if they work from home, if they work in a central office, or if so we know that for everybody we test, we know if it's a work from home. Because we also know, are they overseas? Are they at the home office? Are they at a satellite office? Those all play in. And without question, when people have a community, and even if it's not a physical community, when there's a strong community, they perform better.
Really? How do you measure that?
Well, here's what we find. For example, when we're calling and trying to get through an authentication process, what we find is a person who is working outside of the main office or outside of the community tends to not know what to do when they're challenged. They tend to not know how to escalate a suspicious event as well. They tend to not know what to do whenever the authentication is not going like they expect. And it's because they're not in, and that's why we always talk about culture. For us, culture of security, culture of awareness is everything, because and it doesn't have to be physically in person. It has to just be a way of everyone talking and thinking the same way. If a person, now overseas wasn't necessarily worse, but if your home office is here and you have an overseas office, that overseas office is a little bit not as trained as well. Their situation is a little more difficult to escalate, a little harder. And what that we found is, if we're doing a test and 20% of the time we can get authenticated fraudulently at a home office or at where there's a strong community, as soon as you get satellite and as soon as you get working from home, it goes up by 10%, sometimes 35%. And it's very consistent. And the best thing we can say is that it has to do with the consistency of awareness. It has to do with the consistency of knowing what to do when an escalation is needed, what to do whenever authentication is not going right, what to do when you get an email or a message that seems weird or a chat that seems weird. People just seem to be less prepared when they are not part of that centralized community. And so for us, that's where we've had to pivot. We've had to change what we do, not just our audits, but in the programs we run. We're not just doing training anymore. It's not like, we're not just doing annual awareness training. It has got to be something that brings people together, no matter where they are, and helps build in them a way of thinking, a way of behaving.
Yeah, I'm so pleased you've told me this, because I've been what I call a road warrior for about 12 years. So I've had access to our offices. I mean, we're in 88 countries, and so I can go into any one of them. I travel a lot for a living, but I work from home aside from that the rest of the time.
Yeah.
Now, I probably trained myself into the kind of animal that works well under that environment, so sure. I'm okay with it. But you've just reminded me of what it feels like initially 12 years ago to be kind of isolated. So I think what you're saying is, when somebody is being socially engineered, they're on a phone call or some email came through, but they're working by themselves at home. If they were in the office, they could look over their shoulder and go, "Hey, Pete, what's this? Look at this email right here. Hey, IT guy, look at that." You don't get that at home. And so people are going to err on the side of I need to get my job done, and so maybe I should surrender this information because this person needs it.
Or just not know what to do. Yeah. Listen, this week we've been doing phishing. We run our own programs here internally, and we've been running phishing simulations with our employees. And I'm telling you, every time one comes out, you hear people talking. Did you see this? Is this real? That's what happens with emails. If you have a good community, that is, whether it's on whether it's through chat, even if it's not in person, when you have a community, people say, "Hey, did you see that email? Is that real? Or did you check that out?" That is so powerful.
So tell me this then, because it's interesting, because I am connected to my office through WhatsApp, through my intranet, through email, which is so 2012. Everybody hates email, but through all these various mediums, but that's not community. Right. Yeah. So how are we going to do this? How are we going to bring people together so that I've got, "Hey, Pete, look at this email, man. What's this?"
Community has to do with everybody being on the same page with their awareness. So, for example, we all know that when you're just doing compliance training, it doesn't change necessarily people's ongoing awareness. It doesn't. And so what we have discovered is people have got to have something they all share in. So it is when we send out sessions to them, or whenever we send out phishing simulations and we educate people, it's all about them sharing in something. One of our guys here always talks about it being water cooler talk, even though the water cooler's a thing of yesterday. It is, how do we create that virtually? And that's what we're trying to do. I'll give you an example. Here's a quick story of where we found the problem was. And here's another thing about people working from home is all of a sudden technology is needed that is dangerous. A VPN is one of the most dangerous things that exists. And when everybody that works from home, all of a sudden that technology can get in the open and is valuable. Well, we were one time decided we're going to try to figure out if we can get VPN credentials for this organization we were testing. And I won't tell that side of the story, but we ended up having to get them to FedEx us a pre-configured client to a front desk of a hotel. That's how we got it. And they sent us a CD at the time of a pre-configured, but we needed the IP address and we couldn't get it. So we decided to call somebody at home that we knew used it. And so we called somebody at home saying, "This is somebody," and we'll pretend like we're the IT department. So we called them and they were at home, and we said, we knew what they were called. We're calling from the IT group. "We need you to check some settings on your VPN client. It doesn't seem to be working right. It looks like it's maybe getting some duplicate logins. So let me check it out and make sure your settings are right." And so the person said, "Oh yeah, I'll be glad to help." And we said, "Okay, go in there and look at it. Okay, click here, click here." And really, we just needed them to read, even though it was this one little piece of information, it gave us the keys to the kingdom. And we said, "Do you see where it says IP or group ID?" And they said, "Yeah, I see it here." And I said, "Well, what is it? What's the number?" And the guy paused. The guy stopped, and clearly he got uncomfortable. And he said, "I don't know if I'm supposed to give you that. I don't know if I'm supposed to tell you that."
Right.
And so the response to that is, always for us, we don't want to stir up trouble. So we're like, "Hey, listen, if you're not comfortable, it's fine." And he said, "Do you really work for ABC company?" He was suspicious. And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Okay, I just had to be sure." And he gave us the number. And that to me said a lot, because that is a person that's working in isolation, that has very valuable information. They're getting calls and being deceived. And when they're uncomfortable, they don't know what to do. And it demonstrates a lack of this general mindset that says, here's how our company works. Here's what we do, how we do things.
Right.
And the consistency plays a big role.
It's almost as though there are too many tools. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I have this problem all the time. Did I send that message through email, through WhatsApp? Did I send it through our intranet? Did I send it on LinkedIn? Did I send it on?
Yeah.
And I'm searching for all these various places, right? And then if I need something, so let's say, I mean, I'm obviously a security guy, but if I needed help, so where would I go for help? I suppose I know.
Yeah.
Most people don't, right? To be fair, most people don't know. There's a wonderful chief security officer of the company ADP, the payment company, and Roland Kutler. And what he does, every new employee, everybody, and he's the chief security guy, he gets 15 minutes.
Yeah.
They have to have mandatory 15 minutes on his calendar. Every new employee like that, he can say, hey, I'm the guy. If there's anything, you come to me. Here's my number, here's my email, here's a get hold of me, right? So it's like, wow. And this is a top-notch fella who is like, really, you got 15 minutes in your calendar? He says, Eddie, I have to have 15 minutes on my calendar. It's like, yes, he gets it right.
Well, he understands how important it is that everybody sees the value of security, because a lot of times what people do is they just fall back on the technology. They're like, oh, the firewall will catch that, the email filter will catch that. Email filtering is so good now, I won't get any phishing emails. Right. They fall back on the technology, and when that who you just described there, that is a person who takes very seriously educating their people on the culture, and also letting them know, we found that without question, the number one thing that can make a company vulnerable is if their employees have no idea how to escalate a suspicious activity, or if it's not accepted warmly. That is, if they feel something's not right and they don't know where to escalate it, or if they do, they get in trouble. That to us is the acid test for an unsecure company. And
this is where we in technology tend to fall down on occasion, right? Because we are drawn to this industry because we are technologists, right? But most people, the majority of people, in fact, are not. And so the ones and zeros, the keyboards, these things can be intimidating for people. And I mean, I've had enough calls with, previous companies phoning into MIS. Oh, I don't know how to do this. And you definitely get the vibe of, you're an idiot.
Yeah.
I'm a strong enough guy. So it's like, I'll give it right back.
I can handle it.
Not. And you were mentioning earlier when you're talking about, people don't have a mechanism to share that information. I was going to say, sharing is caring, as cliche as that sounds. This is a thing that perhaps, in fact, I'll ask you sort of for a final note because we're coming to time here. But I think we need to have more compassion. I think we need to have a little bit more caring involved in this thing. And, I'm being very serious about this. It releases oxytocin. It makes people feel more confident, which is what they need in order to be able to say no to somebody who's socially engineering them. So perhaps wrap up, on that note, if you wouldn't mind, Todd. And ladies and gentlemen in the audience, so what I'll do is we will definitely be posting on this website right here, cybertalk.org. So we will have an archive on that website at some point. So you'll be able to find us there. Todd Snap, who's the president of StridePoint. You can find him on LinkedIn. I've got a very unusual name, so Edwin Doyle Manhattan on LinkedIn. I'm the only guy, so you can find me. We would love to continue this conversation in a public forum over LinkedIn. I mean, throw us your questions. We're here to serve you. With that said, Todd, talk to us about, a little bit of kindness and compassion for human beings who are the potential victims of a cyber crime.
Absolutely. I mean, I like your oxytocin idea too. I like that there's a chemical thing about this. Well, because there is, to me, that's what we're talking about here. This cannot just be handled through technology, and it can't just be handled through the low tech. This is, the access to data. This is all about protecting privacy, protecting data.
Right.
And that's about people. That's about people's information and an organization's stability and people's jobs. And so when I think about kindness and, like you said, this idea of caring, that is what we're trying to build in people, is an understanding that we're not just protecting just nameless, faceless data. We're protecting people's money. We're protecting people's jobs. And so to us, escalating something that's suspicious is a positive behavior that companies have got to embrace.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so that's why you've heard me say it 10 times so far today. That's why culture is what we talk about, that the combination of technology defenses and a culture of defense, that's where you fill your gaps in. That's where you really are covering your bases, because people just learning basic facts about technology or about security, people just making sure their virus, is updated. Your systems have got to be patched. Your firewalls have got to be in place. Your filtering and your endpoint security's all got to be in place. But that doesn't cover everything. And so what we found is that you marry that with this idea, and almost you have to look at it from the people perspective first, almost, and say, what are we protecting? Are our people equipped to protect it? How do we reward them for protecting it? And how do we equip them with the tools to protect our information, not just by giving them software, but by giving them feedback and communication and fresh information and ongoing. And that's what we believe in.
Right.
That's really what we believe in. We did for a long time. We did the annual compliance training and the GLBA and the SOX, and we still do that. We still do compliance training, but we found that security awareness, if you marry that in a more of a culture building, a more micro learning, ongoing type program, marry that with the way you manage technology, which is an ongoing program. Nobody just patches their servers or their network once a year. This is all just about an ongoing defense, preparing your people to defend against some very skilled bad guys.
Well, I tell you, that's my favorite question of the day. This is something for you, ladies and gentlemen, to consider. How can you reward your employees for taking security steps? That's amazing. Tutsnap, we've spoken probably only, 5, 6, 7 times in the last few months, and I've loved every conversation we've had.
Me too.
So I would like to welcome you back to another podcast in the future. Yeah. And thank you so much.
Yeah, good seeing you, Eddie.
Okay, man.
Appreciate it, everybody.